Hey everyone, welcome to this training video on AZ500 Microsoft Azure Security Technologies. In this training video, I will discuss the module on Manage Application Access in Microsoft Entra ID. I have already covered the first three modules, Identity Management, Authentication and Authorization in Microsoft Entra ID in previous videos. If you are new to my channel, please do subscribe the channel and hit the bell icon for latest updates on my videos. This module is Manage Application Access in Microsoft Entra ID, and in this module I will be discussing about the applications assignment, the applications management, and the service principals and managed identities. Managing access to enterprise applications in Microsoft Entra ID, including the OAuth permissions, grants the users the permissions. You can assign the users or groups to an application. You have the options either to do the individual assignment or the group-based assignment of the applications you register. It requires users assignment for an app. It enables this to ensure only those users you assign to the application can sign in. If you want to use the Office 365 applications, you assign the licenses, but this assignment of your enterprise applications you register, you do the assignment to the users or groups directly from this app. Microsoft Entra ID provides many customizable ways to deploy these applications to end users, like Microsoft Entra ID My Apps portal. Main ways to access a Microsoft published application is for applications in Microsoft 365 or other paid suites. Access is granted through the license assignment. You can assign the required license of those applications. Whereas for applications that Microsoft or a third party publishes freely to anyone to use, users may be granted access through the user's consent or administrator's consent. Some applications combine both these methods. The applications are actually the objects that are registered on the Entra tenant, and they are integrated with Entra ID to do the authentication with the help of the service principals. Managing the app registration in Microsoft Entra ID, we create the Microsoft Entra application, and the service principals that can access the resources entails the following steps. Like, we do the app registration first of all, and in this, sign into the Microsoft Entra admin and navigate to the identity application and app registrations blade, where from you can register a new application. Then you do the setup of this application, name the app, select the account type, which kind of account you want to use, be it work account for single tenant, multi-tenancy, or the multi-tenant plus the Microsoft Live accounts also you can accept, or the Live IDs, Microsoft accounts. And you can set the redirect URI as well. Number 3 is assigning the role. So in Azure portal, define the role and its scope for the application to ensure it has the adequate permissions assigned. Finally, access control, assign roles at chosen scope and find the select the registered app and finalize role assignment. Configure app registration permissions scope. This is how you configure the scope for these app. And Microsoft Identity Platform manage access for registered apps only, including the web, mobile app backends, or the web APIs. Registration creates a one-way trust where your app trusts the platform, not vice versa, of course. Once registered, the application object is fixed to its tenant and cannot be moved. This is how you register the application and you assign the scope. Manage and use the service principals. Service principals are nothing but the service accounts. When you register an application on Entra tenant, a service account is created for this. The difference between the application account and the service principal account is that the applications have one-to-one mapping. They are registered with one tenant and can't be moved, whereas the service principals can be registered and I can have multiple service principals on a tenant. So one-to-many mapping can be there, and this service principal can be used by multiple applications. Registering an app with Entra ID creates an identity configuration and enabling integration and choosing between single or multi-tenant setup you want to do. Completed registrations yield a unique app instance and app ID, allowing for secrets or certificate based authentications, scopes, and then customized branding you can do for it. Registration automatically generates an application object and a service principal in your home tenant. I just explained these two different objects, the application and service principal. How are they different? With the service principal creating being separate when using the Microsoft Graph APIs. This service principal can have one-to-many mapping. Single service principal can be allocated to multiple applications also. The relationship between the application object and the service principals. If we look at this, the application object is a global template for an app across all tenants, while the service principals are its tenant specific instances. Like I mentioned, that it's one-to-one mapping for the app. Service principals are needed in each tenant for apps sign in or access, with single tenant apps having one and multi-tenant applications having multiple service principals. Modifying or deleting the application object affects its service principal in the home tenant. Deletion is permanent without restoring the service principal. The service principal will also be deleted. The service principals, you can think of that the applications actually run under the security context of these service principals in that particular tenant. Managed identities for Azure resources. We have the managed identities where we do not want to manage the code-based credentials for the service principals. We want that the credentials of these service principals are rotated by the platform automatically. We have two kind of managed identities, system assigned and user assigned. System assigned identities lifecycle stays with application. It lives and dies with the application service, whereas the user assigned identities can be created and can be managed separately than the application, and it doesn't live and die with the application itself. Azure automatically manages the identities, freeing users from manual identity management tasks. So you reduce the administrative overhead when you use system assigned managed identities. But the problem with them is that it has one-to-one mapping. Each application or the service can have only one managed identity at a time. Same managed identity cannot be assigned to other application. Two variants are available, system assigned, and the second one is actually user assigned. In user assigned, it's one-to-many mapping. It can be mapped with multiple applications, just like a service principal. But the difference here is that in these managed identities, the credentials are managed by the platform. It reduces the administrative overhead. Managed identities for Azure resources, user assigned. We create them separately, then we assign them to the applications or services wherever we want to use, and then we delegate the access on these managed identities. The managed identities you can relate with the managed service accounts or group managed service accounts in Windows servers if you have worked with. I will be putting the links of my dedicated videos around these services I have done. You can watch the videos for a deep dive on any of these topics that you think is more relevant or related to your project. Recommend when to use and configure the authentication for a Microsoft Entra application proxy. For an instance, you have some on-premises applications and you want them to be integrated with Entra tenant. You want that users can leverage their Entra ID or work account to access these on-prem applications. In that case, you can use the Entra application proxy connectors, and remember these key considerations to use the and configure the authentication for the Entra application proxy. It's not recommended to use the Microsoft Entra application proxy for intranet access because this adds latency that will impact the users. These applications are actually internet facing applications. Basically, you should use it for them. Enable pre-authentication for the challenges users first for authentication, and if SSO is configured, the backend application will also verify the user. Change the pre-authentication mode from pass-through to Microsoft Entra ID to configure the external URL with HTTPS. Once a user has pre-authenticated, SSO is performed by the Microsoft Entra Application Proxy Connector, authenticating to the on-prem applications. Choose the pass-through option to allow access to the published applications without ever having to authenticate to Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra Application Proxy can also support the applications that use the Microsoft Authentication Library, MSAL, and you will find the link on the Microsoft Entra Application Proxy in the description of this video for further deep dive. This brings to the end of this module and the learning path 1 of AZ500.